coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about the state of the art in blockchain and cryptocurrency technology. Reimagine 2020.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reimagine 2020. I'm your host, Adam, with a very diverse panel here. Very excited to have this experienced group with us. First of all, thank you all for joining and appreciate all of you viewers and audience out there for tuning in. For all of you watching, blockchain has been around since 2008, but really the components of blockchain have been around for decades, right? We've been working on this for years and in different aspects, and I think it's all snowballed to where we're at now, and we're very fortunate. So which brings me to this panel that can shed some light into the core meaning of what blockchain is today. You'll be surprised in what you hear coming from these industry leaders. So right now, let me go ahead and make a quick introduction to my four guests here, and maybe we'll start with you, Professor Banafa. All right, looks like it's connection. So we'll go ahead and take it for Irina, if you want to go ahead and do a quick little introduction. Name, background, maybe how you got involved in blockchain.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Irina Berkon. I'm in San Francisco, and I'm on the fintech and payments side of blockchain and crypto. And my funny story is I was walking down the street in San Francisco, and someone came up to me and said, "Can you lead our ICO?" And that was, that's a very typical Silicon Valley story, but this is how I got involved. And the reason it got very interesting to me is because of this idea of payments and blockchain and being borderless. And, we can deep dive into that. And this is why I'm still here and still in it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Professor, I think you got disconnected there, but a quick little introduction, your name, what you're doing and how you got involved in blockchain.
Okay. Thank you, Adam. My name is Professor Ahmed Banafa. I teach at San Jose State, and also I teach at Stanford University. And I teach the blockchain technology at both schools, plus the industrial, Internet of Things and all the emerging technologies. The whole thing about the Internet, of blockchain, my involvement came when I was doing my studies on the Internet of Things. I wrote a book about it. Secure and smart IoT using blockchain and artificial intelligence. The reason for that one is when you go to the Internet of Things, you see how big and vast it is, you start thinking about security. So I did some research about how can we secure all those sensors, how we secure all these parts of the IoT, and blockchain was one of the biggest, candidate for that. So start investigating that one, and this is how I came involved with the blockchain.
Awesome. Thank you for that introduction. Pleasure to have you here. Mrinal?
Hey, Adam. I'm Mrinal, one of the co-founders of Casper Labs. I'm a computer scientist. Got my master's at Carnegie Mellon. Been fascinated with technology since I was a kid. Started programming when I was 11. I actually just discovered distributed systems in 2002. I was a open source contributor to the BitTorrent project. And so, this idea of having unstructured, multiple participant file sharing system, I thought was really, really cool. I just started my undergrad then. And then I discovered blockchain technology in 2009, 2010, just became an angel investor in the space. I had a side gig. I mean, this was the side gig. I was working on Wall Street at the time. But, through all of that, got to know a ton of developers in the space and thought there was an opportunity to bring something really interesting technology-wise to the market, hence Casper Labs. I think, having a truly decentralized system that doesn't commit any of those compromises and keeps the developer experience easy is something that's required in the industry. And honestly, the industry is super underpenetrated. I mean, everyone thinks, blockchain's taking off, it's going crazy. Nah, the best is yet to come. We're a decade away from where this industry actually gets.
No, thank you for that insight. I mean, I think you touched on a few topics that we'll get into, but I think this is going to be fun discussion. Sam, little quick introduction and how you got involved in this space.
Sure. So I have a pretty diverse background. So I'm bar admitted in New York, so I'm an attorney. I also have a computer science background, and I also have a business background. And so I think those three seem very disjointed in most scenarios, but it comes together very well in the blockchain space. And I've been in the space since 2014. I got my first Bitcoin without even knowing what it was because I was doing design consulting for like graphical design stuff. And the guy was like, can I pay you in Bitcoin? I was like, what is that? And he's like, just download this thing, make an account here, and then I'll send you some stuff. And then you can like do other cool stuff with it later. And I was like, okay, sure. And so I accepted my first payment then. And then I actually ignored it for a while. I was like, I don't even know what this is. Like I don't even need it. It's not that much money. So I'm just going to deal with this other thing. But then it circled back around in 2016. And one of my friends was that guy, you know, who was like, Bitcoin this, like Monero that, Ethereum's going to take over everything. And so I really just sat him down one day. I was like, you keep talking about it. Like, let me drill your brain. And he answered every single question I had. And it was like mind blowing. I was like, okay, cool, I'm in. And so since then, I've been working on like blockchain related things pretty much full time since 2016. I've done a lot across the board, some of the fintech stuff, some of there was actually an IoT project doing like art provenance. And then the past couple of years, I've been working on a decentralized file storage system. So like distributed computing and stuff like that. So pretty much across the board, and I'll leave it there for now.
No, perfect. And that's why I wanted to bring you on board. You know, you're pretty versatile and can touch on various points of it. And everybody's kind of touched on one aspect of blockchain, and I think it kind of brings this theme together, you know, that I just thought about right now. It's embracing decentralization, right? This digital world that we're all moving forward to. So I want to pose a question here to each of you, and maybe I'll start with you, Mrinal, on what is blockchain? Like, what does it mean to you? And not from a technical standpoint, but mainly from, you know, what's it going to do for us? You know, the viewers are watching. There's some students, you know, middle of the pack, trying to go down this rabbit hole and understand, you know, what blockchain is, what, you know, separating crypto, blockchain, Bitcoin, all the above. But to you, it might be something different of what blockchain really means. You want to give some, you know, your take on that?
Sure. If you step way, way back, and this might be a semi-technical answer, but it's not really that technical. What blockchain is really is the best form of copy protection we've ever created. That's really all it comes down to. If you think about, you know, people tried to prevent music piracy, people have tried to prevent piracy of movies, and none of the schemes, you know, whether it's DRM or DMCA, none of these encryption or other schemes have helped create a unique digital asset, because the versions of copy protection were all susceptible to A, centralized authority, and 2, susceptible to hacking. And that all of that really came from the first thing, because they're susceptible to centralized authority. You figure out what that person is doing in its encryption scheme, you can reverse engineer it. Blockchain really comes down to being the best form of copy protection humans have ever created. So as a result, the reason we've never had digital money before, and while I think money is an interesting use case, I don't think that's the only thing blockchain is useful for. And I think it'll be useful for a lot of other things, but really it comes down to the fact that we've created an excellent form of copy protection. You want a digital asset that has only one version of itself out there, this is really the only technology you can use and guarantee that, to, you know, within reasonable limits, that it won't be replicated, because the cost to replicate it is so high. Adam, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think, no, that makes total sense. Thank you for those inputs, and there's various kind of aspects that blockchain touches. Irina, what about for you? You know, you come from a, you know, fintech kind of background. I don't know. What does blockchain mean to you? Might not even have to deal with fintech.
Yeah, so I'm glad Mrinal kind of mentioned it, that there is a blockchain component, which I want to try to go into, but then there is the digital money component. So the way I kind of looked at it is there is no way right now I can send a 1 cent or 2 cent wire or ACH payment to somebody across the world without it being costing more than what that wire or ACH or whatever the amount is. And with Bitcoin and other currencies on the blockchain, and we won't go into the fact whether they're scams or illegal or what the I guess the ethical status of them is, you can do that now, and that opens up a whole world for some people that would not otherwise be able to have access to any banking system. And yes, it opens up a world to potentially criminal activity on it, but I am focusing on the ones that are not. If you are living, you can pay somebody in a country where $1 is a lot of money, and it costs right now $20 to send a wire, whereas with a Bitcoin, it costs nothing. So in the big picture, this is what I'm interested in. The other part of it is I'm interested in the identities being kept properly secured on the blockchain. And this goes back to what Mrinal is saying, that it's a distributed system. There isn't one person, one entity somewhere controlling it, which makes it more accessible and maybe more comfortable for people to access it. So that's my part of it.
Great, thank you for that. Professor, what are your thoughts? You also have a different background from maybe the other three here. Well, what is blockchain to you, and what does it mean?
And this one on, okay. I was invited to the RAND Corporation, the think tank, when this whole blockchain came up to the service. And the first question was, what is it? So to answer that question, just to put everybody at ease, blockchain is a software. That's, by the end of the day, it's a piece of software. And the second definition, which is technically speaking, it belongs to a professor in MIT. He defines it as it's a combination of two things: cryptography and human, logic. So cryptography is what we have now, which is the credential. You talk about it, username, password, you name it. And then the human logic. The human logic is the consensus we're talking about, whether it's a proof of work, proof of stake, or any kind of proof of X, we talk about it. And that make it more understanding for people. And I give the example of, if I go to the class and I have 50 students in the class, and then if somebody want to come in, if there's just one person at the door checking everybody's credentials or ID, that is the 50% of what we have now, which is the cryptography. But if everybody have a copy of the list and names and pictures of who's supposed to be in that room, then they can check that one, and with a certain percentage, they will have the consensus if this person can be in that room or not. We use the same logic when we come to the case of the blockchain. So nobody can change it, because we start flipping one of those nodes, it's the gossip protocol will kick in, and then you're going to find yourself has a different information, and some of the nodes you kick them out. So that is the simplest definition of blockchain. It's a software. It's a combination of cryptography and human logic. And the other thing is the components of the blockchain, which is you make it easy for us to understand. It's peer-to-peer, it's a cryptography, consensus protocols, validity rules, and ledger, where you can save all this information. You bring them all together, it makes sense for people. It doesn't matter what their technical level.
Totally, I think you kind of summed it up there. And Sam, what's blockchain to you? You kind of come from various backgrounds, and what's going on there? Oh, but first I wanted to ask you, unfortunately it wasn't 10,000 BTC for that favor, right?
No, not quite. But yeah, so I actually gave a talk once on beginning development for like Ethereum. And I think the definition I gave there kind of is good for blockchain as a whole. And it's really, in computer science, there's a term called state, right? Like it's like a snapshot of the world or like the universe at the time. And so what blockchain is basically just a way to distribute state onto computers and have people agree. And so I think with that foundation, conceptually, that's pretty hard to do on a computer science, like a technical perspective, but it's it's very interesting from a like sociological perspective. So money is like the common example here, like Bitcoin is like a form of digital money, but it's just a snapshot of the balance of everybody's, accounts at the time, like not really accounts, but once you have that kind of underlying agreement on I have this much money and you have this much money, then you could do other cool stuff from that point forward. So it's a digital state plus like a way to agree on that state.
Awesome, which kind of leads into my next question. And everybody here is working on something different within blockchain. And it could be decentralized mainly, but ideally, and I'll start with you, Irina, like what are some applications that you're seeing, kind of, what you're seeing and how blockchain's playing an important role in that? Like you mentioned earlier, payments and stuff. What else are you seeing? What are you seeing nowadays?
Well, payments is a big deal. There's a company I'm involved with now that also is putting kind of this identity on the blockchain where, when you are using a credit card or you're using a bank account, you're giving a lot of your information to complete strangers. So if you can put that on the blockchain and give a lot less information while in the background it's getting validated, then that's a lot more secure. So I think security and identity protection is a big deal. There is a lot of issues that are coming up with that and have been coming up. Credit cards get stolen, people's social security numbers get stolen, identity is always compromised. That's very interesting, important to me. I think the payments field is still out there to be tapped in as well. There is Bitcoin and we're all very used to it, and maybe that's the one that wins. But there is still a lot of opportunities, I think, in the payment system.
And I also wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on blockchain, crypto, like reaching out to the unbanked? Is that going to happen? When will that happen? Or have you thought about that? Just kind of like, is this going to be a solution for these developing countries? Is that?
Yeah, well, it is happening. It's already happening. We can think about our own personal examples. If you want to hire someone in Russia to do something for you, or in anywhere in Eastern Europe, it is very expensive to send money to them. And some of those people don't have access to banking, and some of them, it's not because necessarily there's no banks where they are. Sometimes banking is very expensive in those countries. Yes, there are countries where banking infrastructure doesn't even exist, and those countries are really benefiting from this. So there are different levels of unbanked. I think that we are really helping, and one is there's no banking infrastructure. The other one, it's too expensive for me to reach this banking infrastructure. And the third one is the cross-border banking infrastructure is very inaccessible to people, and it is not very easy to convert money or transfer money, or for people to just have access to it.
And so do you think the demand is there? The demand from, obviously Bitcoin's available, and then I think the next step is education, right? Like, am I going to use it or not? Or I don't know what it is, so therefore I'm not going to use it. Fear. What are you seeing out there as far as accepting it, or the demand side of here's a tech and now it's the consumer that really needs to accept it and adopt it? Are you seeing, Eastern Europe, Russia, what about even kind of extended further than that? Are people opening up to it, or we're at the beginning?
I think there's still a couple of issues with this. So one is regulation, right? So you still can't buy milk, whatever we want to call it, with Bitcoin, right? It's still not very easy unless you are somewhere and it's just for fun, right? You buy coffee with Bitcoin. So regulation, how do you cash out your Bitcoin for cash, for fiat, so you can buy the milk with it? So that's one thing. The second thing is it really easy to build something, right? To build a wallet. And I think this is what, maybe companies like Casper or some other ones are working on, how easy it is for me to walk in and start using a crypto asset or a digital asset. And I don't really know if there is an answer to that, I think that there are companies that are working on making it a lot more acceptable and for people to be able to approach it a lot easier. But I agree that we're still a long way out. You know, if you think right now of one solution, you know, is there really one crypto wallet or exchange that solves all of your problems? And I don't think there is one that exists. I think there's a lot that are close, but there isn't one that exists. So I think until the regulations kind of catches up to it, and they are in different countries differently, and the user experience catches up to it, we're still a little bit behind.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and, go ahead, Professor. Did you want to say something?
Yes, I mean, one thing about it is just look at Libra of Facebook. I mean, they're trying to do exactly what we are talking about. We have about 1.7 billion, unbanked people in the world, and they're trying to reach this one through the infrastructure of, of Libra and as an organization, and how much trouble they find themselves with, which from the AML, the anti, money laundering or know your customer, concept, and how the resistance from every single country for that one. The concept of digital money is the future. That's what I believe in. It's coming. Nobody can stop it. It's just who will carry the flag and who will be there to, to open the door for this. Central banks, they are not saying no. They're saying just be ready for that. What we are trying to do with the digital money here, which is we're trying to avoid the central bank, trying to avoid the fees of the banks, and they're not happy with that. They need, a piece of the pie. And this is why, the Facebook is really struggling big time to get this one in the service.
Great, and I think this is kind of one aspect of blockchain here, and I think I want to move it over to you, Professor, and I'll go to you, Mrinal, after, is kind of in the IoT space, right? For the viewers out there trying to understand kind of some of the applications going on. We just told them what we all think about what blockchain, really is and how that plays a part, moving forward. But on the IoT side, blockchain plays another role of infrastructure, of layer, right? Of putting all of these pieces together, such as AI, machine learning, eventually, the autonomous cars, all that discussion is being had. What's going on with IoT and blockchain and that kind of marriage?
Okay. IoT is actually divided into 4 parts, just to understand how big and and huge is that field. The sensors, the network, cloud/AI, and then the applications. And you have security problem at every single one of them. The sensor themselves, they need to be secure. And if we are talking about smart sensors, you're adding 3 elements to the sensor, which is, IP address, operating system, and algorithm, so it can process the data. You need to secure that. The same thing with the, with the communication, whether it is a Bluetooth, Zigbee, Ethernet, LTE, whatever you are using, you need to secure that. The same thing goes with when you go to the cloud. When you go to the cloud and you run the applications and you try to get the insights, you need to protect that one. And then goes to the applications. You look at your phone, you would like to turn on and off, a light, you want to, monitor, traffic or do all these ones. Part of the whole thing about the blockchain. About the Internet of Things. And blockchain will secure this one by making sure that the information is immutable. Nobody can change it. So for example, and this is one thing that I'm working on these days, a research about using the blockchain with the current situation of the COVID-19, where you can apply it to the supply chain. And the supply chain is one of the best candidates for both the blockchain and the Internet of Things, where you have sensors that will sense the temperature, the weight, take pictures, send that information, whether automated or manual, and you're going to keep track of this one from point 1 to point, 50,000, and you keep this information. And when everything is missing, then people will know at which part we missed that equipment or that part. COVID-19, from my perspective, is the catalyst of digital transformation. It's actually smashed all the barriers for the detail we're talking about. If you look at who is winning in this horrible situation of COVID-19 is technology. I mean, look at what we are doing today. I mean, look at the education, look at jobs, look at everything. We switched to the virtual world in no time. This is something that cannot happen by our own momentum. Something external came, which is the COVID-19, and pushed us to that direction. And that push is really opening the door for so many problems, which is exactly about the security, or cybersecurity is a huge problem in that. So you hear a lot of scams, you have a lot of problems going on. I mean, just to second what we are talking about, it is there are actually some fake wallet, hot wallet, claiming that you will get it if you download this one, and that one is related to COVID-19 research. And so they are using these kind of things just to get to the people through their fear of this part. Now, for the case of blockchain helping with the COVID-19, there are actually very specific field that it can help. It can help with tracking the disease outbreaks. Why? Because you'll have all those hospitals as nodes of the blockchain. Censorship is not going to work because there will be multiple copies of the information, and that will be shared with everybody, governmental or non-governmental. And then the donation track, that's another thing, because people are really trying to help with the donation. And the trust is the biggest thing in the donation. Crisis management, which is where we can use the smart contract concept, where if we get a certain level of infected people at any place in the world, then there will be some kind of recommendation sent to those government or organization. And then securing the medical supply chain, which is, we know how bad it is these days when it comes to fighting with the state trying to get hold of those equipment.
Awesome. No, thank you for that insight. I've been hearing about that, right? Couple people that are in this space that are trying to leverage blockchain and can help identify more, where the disease, where the virus is, and the infection rate, right, and all that. Mrinal, we've just talked about a couple applications, couple use cases. You're actually working on a blockchain. Can you give a little insight onto, what your blockchain is, and maybe real quick how it compares to others or doesn't compare? And then, we can continue on. But yeah, give us an insight into Casper Labs.
Sure. I'd say fundamentally, where we're different is we believe that you can solve the trilemma of blockchain scalability, which is maintain decentralization, maintain security, yet have really high throughput without committing any sacrifice to it. Essentially, what's happened in the blockchain space is, since Ethereum was proposed in 2014, every attempt to scale the network has come at some compromise, especially to decentralization and security. And so let me talk about each one. So you take decentralization, a lot of blockchains have either a permission system, they decide who gets to be a validator or not. They limit the validator set, meaning there's only a certain number of individuals that can come. Or they have types of validators. There are super nodes or sub nodes, or everyone has to, agree on what time it is by having everything synced to exactly this point in time. All of these are things that, crush decentralization and crush permissionlessness. And these are very important. I mean, blockchain, if you just want a fast transaction processing thing and you're going to trust a limited number of people, that problem's solved. It's called a database. And so our approach is, how do you scale these things without committing those decentralization sacrifices? And the second is on the security side. We just think proof of stake is a much better system, both in terms of security and limiting cartelization. But in addition to that, our approach to everything we do is something we call correct by construction, or CBC. And not to get too technical, but a lot of blockchains prove that they're secure, or prove that they'll eventually come to consensus in what I'd call a statistical or probabilistic way. Meaning, hey, you take most scenarios, something bad's not going to happen. That's one way to do it. So you're probabilistic or statistical. The other way to do it is you just mathematically prove that attack XYZ can never happen unless thresholds A, B, C are met. And that's a much more pure mathematical foundation of how you build things. And that's kind of the route that Bitcoin and Ethereum took. Despite, throughput issues, the reasons why they are the leading chains comes down to the fact that they don't sacrifice decentralization, and the security, as well as the liveness of those protocols, is mathematically provable, as opposed to being probabilistic and statistical. And really, that's what we're about. let's create a pure proof of stake chain that doesn't commit any of those compromises. It's a more expensive way to build a blockchain, but we think it's completely open source anyway. So we'd love to build a leading blockchain, but worst case scenario, if it's technology that everyone else uses to push the industry ahead, we're massive believers in open source. So hopefully we've done our part regardless.
And yeah, I think my next question to you is, where are we in the landscape of these blockchains? Like, are we headed in the right direction? Are you satisfied with where your team's at? This stage in the game. What inning would you say we're in in a baseball game? Like first inning, fifth inning? Or we haven't even started the game yet. It's just so early. I don't know how early we are, I guess.
I'm trying to figure out what's the right analogy with the internet, because so I'll tell you a number that kind of brings it home for me. There's about 15,000 to 20,000 developers that work full-time in blockchain, or half to full-time. And there's 26 million developers worldwide. So any way you look at it, we're 0.1%, 0.4% penetrated. So the industry is vastly underpenetrated. I think people say, yeah, there's a bunch of market leaders, this is going to win, that's going to win. I'm like, well, Alta Vista was the most used search engine when only 0.2% of people were using search engines. I think that's where we are, sort of. The industry is just vastly underpenetrated. People don't really use this technology. We're kind of in a bubble, all of us who work here. But I still have my friends on Wall Street and who I talk to all the time. The biggest issue the industry is facing is not people hate it. The biggest issue the industry is facing is people are bored and are apathetic. They just don't really care that much. I think people in the industry have this view that, oh, we're the enemy, they're against us. I'm like, no, I wish so. They're not that interested. We're just not that hot to them. And I think people miss that. So I think in extremely early stages. I mean, if you look back, the level of penetration is extremely low, which means there's massive opportunity here. I do think the underlying premise of creating great copy protection, digital money, fintech, all the things Irina, Ahmed, and Samuel talked about are there, but at very, very early stages, at best. There's a decade plus left for this story to really play out.
Sam, kind of want to get your thoughts on that, on kind of where we're at. Again, you have a diverse background and you've seen the space, and you and I, most of us are up here in San Francisco. What's your take on what kind of Mrinal said, or maybe, Irina or Professor over here?
Sure. So I would say for the first couple of years, I was in the camp of like, yeah, decentralize all the things, right? But the past year or so, as I've gotten more exposure into like the enterprise side and like kind of like the on the ground use cases side, where I'm talking to major like large corporations about their even like pilots within the blockchain space, it's very clear that the priorities are very different between like the like the crypto community and like the blockchain for enterprise community, as well as other like there's other like pockets of it, but like those two are pretty starkly contrasted. Where I know Mrinal mentioned like the trilemma, which is like security, speed, and decentralization. They don't care that much about decentralization. A lot of the enterprises really genuinely don't care. It's only there because it has to be there for it to be called blockchain. They're perfectly happy with having this massive centralized database. If they could pull it off with a centralized database, they're happy to do that. And if they could call that blockchain, they're happy to do that, like, because they don't really care about the tech. They're not invested in the tech. They just want to get a product out, get it, get real users, because centralization solves a lot of these problems, like the UX stuff, like actually, let me take a step back on the decentralization thing. There's this interesting dynamic that's different between Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? Like Bitcoin is famous for having Satoshi, who's like an unknown, where it's almost like leaderless, right? It's this community kind of coming together to drive the entirety of it forward. Whereas on the Ethereum side, there's, Vitalik or whomever else, and like the Ethereum Foundation or whoever else. And they kind of take that leadership role. And so if Vitalik says, hey guys, we should do this, people are like, cool, like our leader says we should do this. And so it's easy to rally behind like a leadership figure, right? But in the blockchain space, especially on the enterprise side, if you go fully decentralized, you lose that leadership like momentum, right? So even in like, for example, Hyperledger, where you have IBM, like a massive global, powerhouse, they come in and say, we're going to be the ones to drive this momentum forward, right? We're going to push this initiative. And then we're going to get all our buddies to kind of join in on our project. And they have options for if they don't want to join our project or whatever, they can base theirs off of ours or whatever. But that dynamic of like leaderlessness and like kind of driving that forward, I think that is a fundamental issue inside the adoption phase of blockchain as a whole, because it really depends on which pocket of people that you're trying to get adoption from, right? If you're going after enterprise people, you might want to go towards this, like have a very reputable leader kind of drive things forward. But if you're really on like I don't trust anybody, I don't trust the governments, I don't trust any of the banks, I don't trust anything, then you kind of lean more heavily on the decentralization side, and you kind of have to go leaderless to some extent. So I'm really interested in hearing this broad panel's opinions on that topic of decentralization and its place in blockchain and kind of like adoption as a whole.
And yeah, you kind of bring up some good points, and I'll let you guys chime in real quick. We got about 15 minutes left on, obviously but I feel like there is some interest on the public chain, I should say, depending on the spectrum of decentralization, and when you guys can pick it up. But why doesn't everybody just build on Fabric or Hyperledger? I feel like there's some interest beyond that, right? Like, or else they would all just jump on Hyperledger to build a permission blockchain or
So you can't ICL on Hyperledger.
Sorry about that. So, yeah, you bring up some good points, Sam, which kind of leads, sorry, what was your question again? You wanted to pose it to the group regarding decentralization and centralization? Is that what you proposed?
Yeah, like the dichotomy of like decentralized, no leader, and like almost like a decentralized / centralized with a leader. So that in terms of adoption or in terms of how you guys are viewing the industry.
All right, I'll bite first. I think hopefully eventually the majorly used public chains become as leaderless as possible, closer to Bitcoin, while avoiding some of the chaos. Like, I think the reason why there isn't as much, there's some chaos in the Bitcoin community. And by the way, I love Bitcoin, so I'm not trying to slag the community in any way. Huge supporter and always will be. But some of the chaos is, like, for example, there isn't a developer DAO, for example. So, if someone wants a grant to work on it, they have to rely on private parties that may or may not care about the underlying protocol itself as much. And so, it could be co-opted, so to speak. So I think if you're able to set up, the right set of foundations and the right set of incentive mechanisms, similar to what they did with Linux, because if you think about Linux is a publicly supported operating system, and it runs pretty much every server in the world today, or close to. And really, they have a great internal grant process. They have companies like Red Hat, Ubuntu, etc., who make capital off of it. But they've all decided it's all better for all of us if the core Linux kernel is always maintained and always does, is always at the leading edge of server technology. I don't know what exactly that looks like in the grand scheme of blockchain, but ideally, the closer we get to something like that, the better. Where any change to the protocol, etc., can be essentially not voted on, but it also kind of comes to consensus across like a GitHub forum or something like that, similar to like what happens in Linux. I agree with Samuel when he says, everyone who like can figure out a solution to a business problem a centralized way would rather do it in a centralized way than a decentralized way. That is absolutely true. I think one of the biggest issues we've had in the industry is we try to like force things onto the blockchain that have no business being there. A blockchain is useful for bringing parties that don't necessarily trust each other to share data and share transactions in one shared space. And it's great where you can establish trust in an identity-less, leaderless manner, and that's immutable and can't be changed. This is not 100% of the technology stack. This is 10 to 12% of the technology stack, which is still massive. It's still a multi-trillion-dollar industry. But, you know, I think everyone tries to put everything on the blockchain. For example, you should not be storing movies on the blockchain. And you won't believe how many like movie-based like blockchain startups I've seen. It's not sensible. It doesn't make sense. So, you know, I agree with everything Samuel said. I think decentralization is important, and we need to push people towards, you know, sensible use of applications, because otherwise it just sounds like a buzzword as opposed to something actually useful.
Irina, I want to get you involved real quick. Like, where do you think the actual technology lies? Are we in a good spot? Obviously, the tech will grow and get better. Are you kind of satisfied with the options that are available from what you're seeing with the companies you're involved in, or maybe the companies you're involved in that are trying to make, you know, that are innovating? Are they innovating or perfecting? What are your thoughts on kind of the technology as it stands today? Is it suitable for us? You know, we just talked about kind of all the bells and whistles and, you know, all the features that chains provide. And, you know, you're going to pick and choose which one you want to work with. But in your thought, you know, the technology where it's at today, are you satisfied with kind of where we're at?
Well, I want to say a few words about the previous question, maybe as it relates to payments and financials. So it's a very interesting concept of centralized and decentralized in payments, right? So we have Bitcoin on one end, like Samuel said, and then we have something like, you know, the JP Morgan Chase created a coin, right? And Libra and whatever else. And why can't they just use Bitcoin? And it's because they don't want to be decentralized. And maybe, you know, and for a person like me, it's not something to discuss. There's technology behind it that's more user-friendly, right? It takes a long time to send a Bitcoin, and it takes a lot of energy to create one, and there's a lot of solutions for other things. But a bank is not going to have a decentralized coin ruling its bank. It's banking inside, it's currency, right? So there is, I think there is kind of this internal struggle still happening. Does JP Morgan Chase really need blockchain to create this coin? Is it kind of what Samuel was saying, just a fancy word, but really it's a centralized system? And maybe it's okay, and maybe that's, you know, that serves a certain purpose. In terms of the technology, so a lot of things are coming out, and I think there is a lot more choice now for financial, like fintechs, to use the tech. But again, I'm not an engineer. I don't really know how it works. I kind of understand, you know, the speed of it and the security of it. But I think we are still kind of in the space of Bitcoin and everything else. And I don't know how it's going to get technically merged. You know, there are things being built on the Bitcoin to make that easier to use, but that is why all these other things are coming out. And they are, you know, they're very useful. And again, who's going to win? I don't think we know yet.
Professor, you want to weigh in on any of this discussion?
Yes. Thank you, Ariana, for the point. It's an excellent point. It is the Bitcoin and the altcoin. Those are the two universes that are separating. You know, in my class when I'm teaching the blockchain, every student create their own, you know, cryptocurrency, and they name it whatever they want. You know, they create 1 billion if they want. So they finish my class billionaires. You know, all of them, no exception. So it is the creating. You know, cryptocurrency is basically a piece of code program. And if you look at it, I can share it with you guys. It's about 600 lines. It's not a big deal. The key thing about it is what JP Morgan is doing with Ethereum in one side is actually creating this platform called Quorum, which is competing with the Hyperledger of IBM, because IBM is dominating, the private blockchain market. They're actually the leader in this one. Anytime you talk about any kind of a application for any company, their first name comes is IBM. Hyperledger, like like Walmart, for example, they're really leading in this one. So they created one which is with Ethereum that will handle some of the project there. Bank's not going to go away. I mean, just look at the situation we have now. When the internet came, everybody thought that no more TV, no more radio. It's just the share of that medium is really changing. How do I vision the future? We're going to have Bitcoin. We're going to have other coins that will exist at the same time. Look at the operating systems we have. We have Windows. We have all these 3, 4, and they're fine. It depends on what application you have. So it's not like the winner takes all. It's how much share this currency will dominate the market and how it's easy for people to get their hands on that. For the case of Libra and the other, private, cryptocurrency, the only reason for this one to catch, the attention of everybody because of the infrastructure of Facebook using it with WhatsApp. If you visited China before the whole thing happened here, that they're using WeChat for everything. They're using it to pay for every single thing, activities there. That is the same model that Facebook is trying to do, which is initiating the e-commerce using the concept of cryptocurrency, so they can go into the e-commerce field, and expand their reach. So this is from one side. I can add one point, which is really an excellent point you guys raised, and Mrinal raised a very important point about it, which is where are we in in this ecosystem of the of blockchain? If you took any class in marketing, you know about the product life cycle, right? The product life cycle has 4 stages. You're talking about the introduction, then the growth, the maturity, and the decline. We are at the beginning of the growth. What we are seeing now, and I'm old enough to remember that, is exactly what I saw in 1996 when the internet, the consumer internet started hitting the market, and it's huge. And this is exactly the same thing. You're talking about the internet is about connectivity, blockchain is about trust. So what we are witnessing these days is a wave, and this wave is just taken off. And it is just starting, and it's going to cover so many of the industries.
Solid points. And we got a few minutes here. I want to go around with the last question or two based off of kind of our whole conversation, which, leads us to what's the next step for us? We're all in the space. We've already seen what we've seen. We're working on things that we've been working on for quite some time. One, what's the next step to get, where we need to be from each one of you? And then 2, is there enough incubation, fostering support, for all of this to kind of, come to fruition as we, carry along this journey? I'll start with you, Sam, and we'll go Sam, Irina, Mrinal, and Professor here.
So the question was, is there how is the ecosystem basically in blockchain?
What's the next step, right? We've all just touched on different applications, different thoughts of decentralization, centralization, and what's the next step that we need to take? Obviously we're still at this introduction, in growth phase, and Mrinal says we're 10 years out. What's the next step that we need to take, 1, and then 2, is there enough support and fostering or incubation of our industry to kind of move us along?
Sure. I think it kind of breaks down into 2 categories. One is the technical side, and one is the sociological side, basically, the people side. So from the technical side, I'm sure Mrinal and the professor can go much deeper into this, but I think there are serious problems that aren't solved yet. There are obviously scalability is a thing, but also in between the 2, technical and people, there's a real problem. I know on the IoT side and the identity side, it's the gap in between the tech and the people that is the hard part to kind of figure out, right? It's anyone can make a dApp that does identity management on the blockchain, right? But that assumes you can map 1-to-1. This person is definitely this ID, right? So that is a really hard problem. And I know there are some initiatives to try to deal with that, but I think that is a very critical problem that isn't on the tech side. It's like kind of halfway in between. So I know India did like a pilot with their identity thing. And I think China's doing one, but it's not on the blockchain. They're just doing it centralized. But I think those are like that middle space is the really hard stuff. And I don't know about the incubation. There was a lot of money in the space. There still is, but I'm not really up to date right now on how much, like the Corona stuff is affecting deployment of capital in the space.
But you think there's a lot of support still? Not an actual incubator accelerator, but just, or maybe even that too, but just kind of, maybe from the investment landscape, the research landscape, the public landscape,
Yeah. So from the money side, we're in like San Francisco, Silicon Valley. Like money's here. If you have a good idea and you can convince people that you can make them more money, money's always here. But I think in terms of funding from like directly from like, for example, blockchain protocols, like layer 1 protocols, that has slowed, I believe. So it's not 2017 where they're cutting millions of dollars worth of checks for random people on random projects, right? I think that phase is kind of like matured a little bit, where now you kind of have to do more, right? It's not just, hey, I've got a great idea and I've got an Ivy League, like degree, so give me millions of dollars. Now it's kind of more like reality, where you bring them like an MVP, you bring them some users, and then they'll actually consider you like with like normal KPIs, right? Like normal seed round metrics, right? And so I think there's a shift towards that. But if you can do that, there is money available. And on the technical side, I think there are lots of places to learn, right? Like if you're a developer trying to learn how to develop, it really depends kind of on what your programming goals are and what your programming background is. So I think, like for example, no one in school learns Solidity, right? Maybe now they do, but like you learn like Java or C++. And if you kind of go from that, with those languages and with that background, there are much easier places to go which can use that knowledge, as opposed to like learning, I don't know, like Solidity or like some other language that you've never used before. But it's all there. Everything's online. You can find tutorials and stuff.
Irina, like, what are the next critical steps that you think for adoption, maturation, payments, fintech, specifically in blockchain? Where do we go from here?
Well, I really like kind of where Sam was going, and I was going to segue into it. So there's technology, there is the people issue, and then there is the money issue. And I'm part of an angel fund, and we've been around this fund has been around for 15 years, and they have not made any investments in the blockchain space. And the reason for this could be that back in 2016 and 17, there was a lot of kind of gray area, scamming. People didn't really understand it. Blockchain was a buzzword just to get funding. Right now, we're maturing to a point where blockchain can really be explained, and crypto can really be explained. And when somebody comes in, they can really explain it. However, you have to get, all of us here, we know these words, we know what it means, and we can really tell really quickly what's a scam, what's not, if we wanted to put our money into it. But there's a whole world of investors out there that can't do that. And just like I think back in the internet, in the .com times, that was the case, you have to really educate them. And it's companies that actually build products that will do that. In my fund, last week was the first time we had somebody come in and teach us about blockchain and crypto. All of us have been around this for years, and this is the first time some of our members are hearing about what it is. And I think until these kinds of people are writing checks for blockchain and crypto companies, we are not really going to make that big leap, because we're all going to be kind of doing our own thing. I sell one altcoin, I invest in the other. My Bitcoin goes up, I take a little bit of profit, I go buy some other coin. And it's coin, but these people are not investing in coins, they're investing in equity. And then when is my equity going to mature, right? when is the first blockchain company going to exit and make somebody millions? Like, Facebook did, Apple, Microsoft, whoever. And I think that that's going to be the exciting time. And that's where I'm really focusing on and really looking forward to.
Great. Mrinal, you want to share some thoughts here?
Yeah, let's. I think Irina and Samuel both raised really good points. So, yes, I agree with all of that. If I'd add just another angle to that, I'd say really what would make the industry hockey stick, or start seeing that explosive kind of growth, is if there's a proof of concept that actually works. And so let me say what I mean. I ask people like, okay, you're telling me, because people think I'm too negative sometimes when I say this industry is very underpenetrated. And they're like, no, it's used all the time. I'm like, okay, which app did you use in the last 90 days on your phone, even once, that's blockchain based and wasn't to send money? I'm like, Coinbase or sending money to someone doesn't count. Like, give me an actual application that uses blockchain to solve a problem better than it could be elsewhere. And the truth is, there aren't any, right? We talk about all of these use cases, but there aren't any real ones. And I think the moment we have a real proof of concept is when this industry hockey sticks. It's similar to, when the browser, when Netscape was invented for the internet, it started hockey sticking because people could actually see that it was real, as opposed to something only enthusiasts can engage with. Now, the second part of that is, why hasn't that happened yet? And I think the reason it hasn't happened yet is because of constraints to imagination. And the reason imagination has been constrained is the really, really decentralized chains that you can trust, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, are too slow for high throughput applications. And all the high throughput chains out there are too centralized or rely on too much permissioning for you to trust them fully and transfer tons of value on top of them. Once this is broken, once you have decentralized platforms that still scale, which I think us and many others are trying to work on this problem, someone's going to get it right at some point. I think at that point the constraints to the imagination go away and it becomes much easier to use. Similar to what hypertext transfer protocol did to the internet, these kind of protocols will change the way application developers can engage with them. And eventually we'll see those great proof of concepts that will cause it to hockey stick. You want the next app that 10 million people use, which isn't money transfer, to be blockchain based. At that point, it'll just snowball out of control, I think. I don't know when exactly that is, but I can't wait personally.
Now you bring up some.
What app would that be?
You bring up some definitely good points, and we're running out of time here that I wish we could all touch on. But Professor, you want to share your last minute thoughts before we close out here?
Okay, so what we're talking about is something called killer application. That's what we're looking for the case of the blockchain, which comes automatically default with the phone. So this is one thing. If you want me to look at my crystal ball and see what is the future or the challenges that we're going to see in the blockchain, I'm worried about the quantum computing, introduction into the universe of the blockchain. What we are using now is very important, which is the case of the SHA-256 as the encryption or the hashing for the information. Quantum computing can break that one in no time. So you heard about Google, what they have announced last year. What we are working on 5 to 10 years from now is quantum blockchain, quantum, proof of stake, quantum smart contracts. So that will be the next level of the blockchain.
Sam, were you trying to say something before we head out here?
Oh, I was just asking Mrinal like what he thinks that killer app, I guess, would even look like. I know he said it's gated by imagination, but I kind of think that blockchain is a payment system for now, right? It's like internet's a data system for now, right?
Yeah, I agree. I'll give two very quick examples, but I want to make sure other people can get to this too. So two very quick examples. So one, imagine like a Spotify where royalties are paid directly, right? You can completely track the royalties of each actor or singer, and you can just directly pay them. That'd be great. I don't think we have high enough throughput or low enough fees where microtransactions like that are feasible on the blockchain. But once we can, that'd be great. That's a massive use case. Another is just like a general supply chain database. Basically everything you do shipping wise, whether you're ordering something from Amazon or Hyundai is transporting, 100 tons of oil, a shared system where you don't have to put any of the private data on the blockchain, but it basically acts as your trust anchor to make sure that a transfer has occurred, which gives great traceability across massive supply chains, probably would eke out trillions of dollars in value in like lost things. Trillions of dollars of stuff gets lost in today's supply chains because it's basically a pen and paper system. Now that's something that I don't know the end consumer would engage with as much as Spotify, but it would have millions of users, at least on the enterprise side. Because bear in mind, a lot of apps that people use on their phone are enterprise apps, right? Like I use Slack, but the Slack that I use is just internal. I mean, Slack is used by millions, but it's not like a 1:1 engagement. So I think like a supply chain app would be similar to that. It would be used by millions of people. It's not a dating app or a music app, so it's not as widespread in public conscious. But these are just two examples. But really, what they have in common is these are problems you cannot solve with the technology other than blockchain, right? You want to bring a bunch of parties that don't trust each other onto a single platform, and you want to make sure that there's a seamless way to transfer value and recognize that value is going to the right person. And so that's off the top of my head, but I'm an infrastructure guy, so I leave it to the application guys to come up with much better stuff than that.
IBM Food Trust Network is an example of that, which is actually used by a lot of companies. And the thing about it, it's a private blockchain. So you're right, Mrinal, about it. It's not for the consumer. You're talking about B2B, you're talking about B2C, universe here when we talk about the applications. But it's a matter of time until this one will descend to the point where I'm sitting on the table. I want to see the track of the food I'm eating now. It's going to show it to me from the farm to the fork. So again, that emphasizes the fact that we are really at the beginning of the growth stage of the blockchain. We still have way up, in this universe.
Awesome. So I think we came up on time here. First and foremost, I want to thank my guests, Sam, Irina, Mrinal, and Professor Banafa. Appreciate you taking the time out to join us for Reimagine 2020. For all of the audience and viewers, all over the world, appreciate you tuning in to listen to the fabulous panelists here of industry experts and leaders and professionals. So again, thank you all for your time, and be safe out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. It was a pleasure.
Stay tuned to learn more about student interest in blockchain technology. Reimagine 2020.